Money FM 89.3, the best of the afternoon update.
Good afternoon, I'm Nilay. Welcome to Industry Insight, where we explore the latest trends and big shifts transforming industries across Singapore and the region. I'm your host, Nilay, and today we're diving into the evolving world of work in Singapore. As Singapore's job market evolves at breakneck speed, driven by AI, shifting employee values, and a growing demand for practical skills, traditional hiring norms are being upended. What we're hearing is that new-collar roles are leading the charge. Well, new-collar roles refer to those where capabilities are more important than credentials and agility beats academic pedigree. Joining us today to break down the Michael Page Singapore Talent Trends 2025 report is Nilay Khandelwal, Senior Managing Director of recruitment agency Michael Page in Singapore and India. Nilay, great to have you with us.
Hi, Lynn. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone.
Great to have you. And let's start with the big picture. The report calls 2025 a transformative moment for Singapore's workforce. What makes this year such a turning point?
I think we have been in a bit of a flux for some time now. It's been close to 18 months when markets have been a bit of up and down, and we haven't really seen the clarity that economists were talking about, or governments were looking into globally and in Singapore as a landscape as well. So when we look at current report that we have published, Talent Trends 2025, and we specifically dive into Singapore as a market, I mean, the tone of the market remains still very cautious but intentional. And that's the shift from last year, where it was cautious and optimistic. It has now become more intentional. And why would I say so? So employers are hiring now with a lot more intentionality because the pockets are tight. The profitability drive is quite high, especially if you're a listed firm and you have shareholders and investors. You've got to be talking about a quarterly report that shows promises in your financial output. So in that sort of a climate that you're in, it's no longer about just filling roles. It's about a long-term fit, adaptability of the individuals that you bring on board, because what you are designing today may not be relevant in the next 6 months also. So how do you find people with high agility and then values alignment with an individual? So that's more from a market perspective. If I look at employers in general, even in a market which is slightly more challenging, 34% of them, according to our report, still find recruiting talent challenging in Singapore from a market perspective. This is improvement from last year's report, which said 41% of the employers were finding it difficult. And this reflects a continued competition for good talent in market, especially in strategic roles. And earlier you talked a little bit about new collar roles, and that definitely has a role to play in there.
No, it really feels like the traditional career playbook is being rewritten. There's clearly a shift happening across both employer and employee mindsets. Let's dive deeper into the rise of these new collar roles, Nilay. We're seeing a shift away from traditional degrees towards certifications and hands-on experience. How are these roles actually reshaping the job market?
Yeah, I think if you look at the kind of roles that are coming in, and we define them as new collar roles per se, these are largely creating a shift in the hiring market because of the skills in demand over credentials. And if I look at the top 3 challenges of an employer today, the third one in our report turns out to be the required skills unavailable in the market. And that definitely then puts a lot of practical experience into picture rather than just the formal education. And to be honest, the formal education pipelines haven't kept the pace of the changes that we have seen, the disruption that we have seen from a digital transformation angle, the data AI angle. I mean, there are many businesses who never even thought about selling online pre-COVID. And all of that had changed within a few quarters when we looked at 2020 and 2021. And that disruption continues to be. I mean, today we are talking about GenAI and its adoption and what does it mean. So when I look at breaking that down into what sort of industries are driving this new collar hiring, I would say tech would be the foremost industry, followed by fintech. Again, these two are very heavy on technology, and the advancement of technology in these two industries are probably at the forefront. Third is logistics and supply chain, which again, as we know that globally, this has been a challenge for companies to meet up with the hedging of risk, with the geopolitical tensions that comes up from time to time, the trade tariffs that you're talking about. So how do you innovate in that line of business? So those are the top 3 industries which are seeing that shift.
And across the board, what should employers be doing differently to adapt to this skills-first mindset?
I think companies are moving away from traditional CV screening towards competency-based assignments, and I think that should continue. Role simulations and reviewing the portfolio of the individuals that they're bringing on board. And for individuals who are seeking some of these roles, especially the mid-career switchers, they need to be open to more pathways to career growth without relying solely on formal degrees or the past work experience per se. And that would give these organizations a bit more of a bandwidth to go after a lot more candidate pool.
I suppose it's about hiring smarter as well, right? With a clear focus on adaptability and capability over traditional qualifications. Now, nearly half of professionals in Singapore say they would turn down a promotion to preserve their work-life balance. That's quite a statement. What does this tell us about evolving priorities?
Well, I think that is an interesting stat, and whenever I look at that stat, I look at the rising cost. And suffice to say that it would be difficult to turn down. That is quite an interesting one in the current light of things, how things are panning out on the economy side. Look, I think 87% of the professionals did mention that work-life balance is a very important factor, and 48% would turn down for protecting their well-being, which is up from 44% last year. But I think there is a need for balance here, and employers are going through the macro environment, which is very challenging. Profitability, meeting targets, meeting expectations for the investors and shareholders is getting important as well. So I think flexibility, I reckon, is not a differentiator anymore. It's an expectation. But how do you utilize that expectation to meet your customer demand is what it has to be factored into when we look at demanding the kind of flexibility we need. If it doesn't work for the organization, unfortunately, in this current climate, you might be left out in the race. It's striking that balance, which I believe is very important.
Exactly. And I think from the employer point of view, it really shows how values are shifting. Career growth is important, but not at the expense of mental health or personal time. For leaders listening, what should they take away from this shift in mindset?
I think from my standpoint, if you look at overall advice for the businesses, I think use clarity as your competitive advantage. I think this is one thing that individuals who are looking out for roles with new organization, or even looking at staying back in the current organization, are looking for. And when they talk about clarity, they're talking about clarity in three buckets necessarily. It is really to ensure that the employers stance on their policies, the values, and the future direction of the business is pretty clear and articulated and communicated at different levels from time to time. And clarity starts at the top. So, hiring and developing leaders that build trust by communicating transparently will go a long way in creating a psychologically safe environment. So even if the conversation around flexibility comes in, you can manage it with a lot more ease and resonates with the wider organization. And lastly, build a resilient talent pipeline by understanding the multi-generational needs, because the ones in 20s to the 30s to the 40s and the 50s, they don't have the same reason of why they work and what they do and how they make the decisions. So aligning that is absolutely very, very important to have an organization that is very diverse and inclusive at the same time.
Okay. Nilay, we are Money FM 89.3, so I'm going to be talking about money. The push for salary transparency is growing, especially with gender disparities still in play. Your report found 38% of women cite pay gaps compared to 22% of men. What can organizations do to build trust and drive meaningful change?
This has been a conversation going on for years, and the European Union has come up with their commission saying that by 2026 they will be making it all transparent. So companies who are of European origin are already asking questions in Asia-Pac. What does that mean for Asia-Pacific? So it is high time that this becomes a lot more fair in terms of how the actions are, as long as the performances are in line. So from an action point of view, I think from an employer standpoint, be proactive and not reactive to some of these things. And I'm sure that many organizations would have been able to look at it internally. So publish the salary bands and pay frameworks, some sort of an audit around the gender and pay gaps regularly to ensure that there's a check and balance, not just an idea that never gets into the execution phase. Then back up the inclusion efforts with metrics, having representation and leadership. But again, leadership cannot be the only thing. It's also feedback from employees. And how do you ensure that there is a pipeline that is coming through the ranks?
Okay, too true. You mentioned earlier about the adoption of GenAI tools. Let's dig deeper into that. 1 in 3 employees feel unprepared, that's according to your report. So what's behind this disconnect, and how can companies close the gap?
Yeah, look, I think AI and GenAI, they have been there for some time. AI definitely. And I think the social media world that we live in, it makes it even much more of a hype than the need be. But the honest answer is that every organization has to marry the right level of AI or GenAI into their workforce to make it more productive ultimately. And how does it, and what does it mean for the individuals as well? The disconnect generally are coming from not providing structure on clear guidelines of what usage looks like, what are the function-specific cases that someone can refer to, and clarity on what's encouraged or acceptable. Because we know that with the GenAI tools, which are open source platform to a large extent, it also comes with its own share of risk as well. So you don't want to be the individual using it and then only figuring it out that this is against the company policies.
That's right. And it's one thing to roll out tools, another to build confidence around them. Sounds like upskilling needs to catch up fast. To that end, should there be a workplace strategy in terms of AI usage?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a very important strategic capability to use a GenAI, and not just as a tool, but as focus for the company. So appointing ownership with HR, digital or transformation teams to integrate GenAI into the core strategy, which will definitely help. Second is setting the boundaries and guidelines, so communicating the policies, clearly articulating what's acceptable, what's secure, what is ethical use of GenAI. I think that would be the second important aspect. And the last one, in my opinion, which I think you were referring to earlier as well, is linking AI to performance and upskilling. And upskilling is absolutely a must because it has such a big productivity play that individuals who may or may not have been in the digital era can really utilize it to lighten their workload or at least make the most effective use of some of these tools to create an impact in the work that they do.
Nilay, in this current climate, I think listeners might want to know this. Which industries are seeing the strongest hiring momentum right now, and what kinds of roles or skills are most in demand?
If I look at sectors, I would say technology would be the primary sector. And within technology, there are specific skills in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, data, and cloud roles that remains quite robust with multinational customers, with our local customers, and also our Asian customers, a lot of Chinese customers included. The second one is fintech and financial services, and this is again driven by digital banking, compliance, and risk. So while there is a growth in the digital infrastructure, it comes at a cost of risk that comes with the cloud and the data. So I think these are the roles that we are seeing in demand within fintech and FS. Third would be healthcare life sciences. And within this sector, we see more of the high-end value-add roles that are coming into Singapore market. And these are in clinical, R&D, regulatory, and commercial roles, because Singapore generally tends to be the ASEAN or a Southeast Asia or APAC play. So you tend to build your team out of Singapore as a location. Of course, the logistics and supply chain largely is because of the automation in the supply chain environment, sustainability, and these are the roles that tend to play out a lot.
And for business leaders listening, what do you think would be the most urgent steps they should take to stay competitive in this shifting job landscape?
I think provide clarity, as I said earlier, it is a must in this kind of economic environment, because with things changing so rapidly, you've got to be communicating as a leader as to what that impact is. And sometimes there is no impact to an employee. A lot of people are thinking about whether I will have my job or not tomorrow. Now, that's difficult to articulate, but in certain cases, companies know that they won't be taking any dramatic action because they need to see it played out for some time. And we already saw that with the trade tariffs. It has changed quite a lot since the first time it was articulated. So I think if you are in that situation, communicate to what the people like to hear to a large extent. To the largest extent you can share. Because I think in times like this, over-communication and providing that clarity becomes a cornerstone of creating that trust equation with your people, especially your core group, your highly important group of people, whether it's in Singapore or across the boundaries that impact Singapore overall. And that, I think, for me, is the biggest takeaway.
Okay. Just before we let you go, very quickly, Nilay, what was your very first job, and what's one lesson from that experience that still shapes how you approach leadership today?
Yeah, my first one, which I really remember, I was in the ICT sector within one of the government organizations. And I think setting up milestones and creating the steps today to reach that milestone. And I think that's the practice that I learned in that organization, looking 5 years or 3 years ahead, as you know how Singapore government tends to look at. And then thinking about what do you need to do today to be able to meet that third or fifth year sort of milestone. So I think that sort of a concept keeps you busy for the short term, which is the obvious one, but also helps you think about what exactly will keep you relevant in the midterm. And this is where the upskilling, we talk about it a lot, the new collar jobs coming into the picture, they just makes so much more sense then.
Since we have a little bit more time, we've been talking about all these trends, upskilling, new collar roles. What's one trend you're personally keeping a close eye on as we move deeper into the year?
I think how do you manage a multi-generational workforce is probably the highest on radar of any CEO or on a business person, because it is becoming very challenging. I mean, I'll give you an example. When I look at the CVs of fresh grads today, I look at them doing 3 different internships in 3 different sectors and 3 different functions.
Wow.
When I was in NUS, I recall I knew what I wanted to get into after graduation, and all the internship that I wanted to get into is those organizations only. And when you ask these individuals, their answers is that we don't know what we want, and we want to experiment. We don't want to just settle into something. In fact, the rise of gig economy will be the byproduct of this, because the current workforce who are graduating out, they're very purpose-driven. Whereas in our days, it was very clear a job gets you to a particular sort of quota or income, or you do a startup or whatnot. But it was never about having so much of exposure. And I think that social media has kept that as very big play for the current generation that is coming out into the workforce. So I think finding that the mid-management who can balance the senior-most management who have grown in a traditional environment and their relationship to work and the trust that they put versus the new generation that is entering workforce, finding that mid-management who can sing the boat, I think that's the crux of any organization having a very solid impact sustainably over the period of time.
Wow, that's a lot to think about for leaders in the industries these days. Thank you so much, Nilay, for breaking down the key trends shaping the future of work in Singapore. A deeply insightful conversation indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And he is Nilay Khandelwal, Senior Managing Director of Michael Page, Singapore and India.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.